The first time I realized my husband was trying to erase me from my own company, he smiled while doing it. Not a guilty smile, not a nervous one. It was the kind of smile people wear when they think they're already safe, when they think the trap is already closed and the person inside it just hasn't noticed yet. I was standing at the end of the long conference table in the executive boardroom of Vail and Mercer Design, the company I had built from a folding desk, a second-hand laptop, and 2 unpaid interns with more optimism than skill. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind me looked down on the city I had spent 16 years trying to conquer. The skyline was washed in gold from the late afternoon sun. People always said the view from that room felt powerful. That day, it felt cold. Across from me, my husband, Grant Mercer, slid a blue folder toward me with 2 fingers and said, very gently, "Just standard restructuring documents. Our attorney says it'll simplify things as we scale." Standard, simplify, scale. Words men like Grant used when they wanted theft to sound responsible. I didn't open the folder right away. I looked at him instead, at the precise knot of his tie, at the silver watch I had bought him after our company landed its first national contract, at the wedding band on his left hand, at the calm in his face. To anyone else, he looked like a loyal husband and competent co-founder managing growth. But I knew something in that room was off. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fact that for the last 8 months, Grant had started saying our company in public and my company in private. Maybe it was because he had stopped asking my opinion and started announcing decisions. Or maybe it was because women like me learn, eventually, that betrayal has a temperature, and that room had gone cold. I opened the folder. The document on top was clean, polished, and boring in the way dangerous paperwork usually is. Title transfer provisions, revised executive authority, emergency continuity clauses, voting protections. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed fraud. But buried in the language, deep enough to be missed by anyone tired, distracted, or trusting, was a clause that would shift day-to-day executive control in the event of temporary incapacity, unavailability, or operational conflict. Operational conflict, another soft phrase. Under that clause, Grant would become sole acting authority over contracts, hiring, banking, vendor approvals, litigation strategy, and board voting proxies. And then there was the second part, a provision redefining my majority ownership through a staged dilution event tied to a future capital raise I had never approved. If executed properly, my 51% could become 24% without ever looking like outright theft. I kept my face neutral. "Who drafted this?" I asked. Grant leaned back in his chair. "Miller and Boone. We talked about cleaning up structure months ago." "We talked about governance improvements," I said. "We didn't talk about stripping me of control." His expression didn't move. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding, because an innocent man would have corrected me, a shocked man would have denied it, a decent husband would have looked offended. Grant just folded his hands and said, "You're being dramatic." There are certain sentences that end marriages long before divorce papers arrive. That was one of them. I closed the folder. In the silence that followed, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the faint city traffic 32 floors below. Then Grant gave a small, patient sigh, like I was making dinner difficult. "Claire," he said, "you've been overwhelmed. Everyone sees it. You're brilliant creatively, but the company is at a point where it needs steadier operational leadership. This doesn't remove you, it protects what we built." What we built, that almost made me laugh. Because when I met Grant, he was an account manager with charm, expensive shoes, and no understanding of design, branding, or risk. I was the one who maxed out my cards. I was the one who slept under my desk. I was the one who pitched 12 clients in 9 days while recovering from pneumonia because payroll was due and failure wasn't an option. Grant came in later, once the worst was over, once the company had shape, Once there was something worth standing beside. I made him partner because I loved him. That is the sentence I should have tattooed somewhere painful. I made him partner because I loved him. Love has bankrupted smarter women than me. I slid the folder back across the table. I'm not signing anything today. His jaw tightened, but only for a second. Then he smiled again. Of course, he said. Take your time. That was mistake number 1. Not mine. His. Because greedy people think patience is a sign of control, and Grant Mercer had just made the sloppiest move of his life. He thought I would go home, have a glass of wine, maybe cry in the bathroom, maybe call him cruel, maybe delay a week and then sign under pressure. He thought I was shocked. I wasn't shocked. I was awake. And once I was awake, I started looking. The first thing I did was nothing. That's the part people never understand when they talk about revenge. They imagine rage, confrontation, thrown glasses, midnight screaming. That's amateur work. Real revenge begins in silence. That night, I went home to our house in Brookhaven, the stone one with the iron gate, and the kitchen Grant liked to show off as proof that we had made it. He got home late, said he had drinks with investors. I asked how it went. He kissed my forehead, said promising. Then he went upstairs to shower while I stood in the kitchen staring at the marble island we had chosen together 12 years earlier. I remember thinking how strange it was that a room could hold so much history and still feel like a stage set. Everything looked normal, and that was the insult, that he believed he could dismantle my life and still come home expecting roasted salmon. I waited until he fell asleep. At 1:14 a.m., I got out of bed, took his phone from the charging dock in the bathroom, and used his face while he slept. People judge that. I don't care. Marriage had already ended. He just hadn't been informed yet. I opened messages first. Nothing obvious. Grant wasn't stupid enough to save a mistress under Vanessa Hart. But secrets leave patterns before they leave evidence. There were late-night message gaps, repeated calendar holds labeled vendor review, a private encrypted app newly installed 3 months earlier. That caught my attention. So did the hotel receipts in his email trash. Not romantic suites, conference hotel rooms downtown, day bookings, too polished to be personal, too hidden to be innocent. Then I found her, not directly, through reimbursement approvals. A woman named Sienna Vale, consulting expenses, brand transition analysis, leadership integration strategy, executive visibility consulting. I almost admired the nerve. He was using company funds to prepare for a future without me, and he had chosen a woman with a surname that nearly matched our company's own. Vale and Mercer, Sienna Vale. That kind of symbolism isn't accidental. Mistresses like being written into the architecture of the lie. I took photos of everything. Messages metadata, expense reports, draft contract notes synced in his cloud drive. Then, just before I put the phone back, I opened the encrypted app. Most threads were deleted, but not all. One survived because Grant, like many arrogant men, believed partial deletion was the same as intelligence. The visible messages were enough. She'll sign. If not, legal pressure will push her out. Once dilution happens, she's ceremonial. Then we clean up the rest. By Q4, it's ours. Ours. I read that word 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I did. There is a special kind of humiliation in seeing your life summarized in a sentence between 2 people who think you're too sentimental to defend it. By Q4, it's ours. I took screenshots, sent them to a new encrypted email account I created on the spot, then erased my traces, returned the phone, and lay awake until sunrise. I didn't cry. I know that sounds dramatic, but it matters, because I was past grief. Grief belongs to loss that happens honestly. This was invasion, and I had no intention of reacting like the injured wife in one of those stories men tell each other over whiskey. The ones where the woman screams, leaves, and becomes a footnote to the real business story. No, if Grant wanted a business ending, I would give him one, just not the version he had written. The next morning I called in sick, not to the company, to my marriage. Then I made 3 calls. The first was to my attorney, Elena Voss. The second was to my forensic accountant, Nathan Rhee. And the third was to the one person Grant feared more than regulators, lawsuits, or public scandal, Julian Cross. Once upon a time, Julian had been Grant's best friend. Not casual golf friend, not college acquaintance. Best man at our wedding, first investor in our seed phase, late-night strategist, drinking partner, confidant. He had also been the man Grant betrayed first. 10 years ago, when Vail and Mercer was still fragile, Julian had brought us into a luxury hospitality deal that could have tripled our revenue. He negotiated the introduction. He vouched for us. He opened doors we were too small to even knock on. Then Grant cut him out. Not openly. Never openly. He maneuvered the contract so the commission structure excluded Julian after close. It ruined their friendship, and nearly ruined Julian's firm. I had fought Grant over it at the time. We had our worst marriage argument up to that point because I told him what he had done was theft, wearing cufflinks. Grant said I was naive. Julian vanished from our lives soon after, not socially, strategically. He rebuilt, quietly, ruthlessly. By the time 3 years had passed, he owned a private equity group specializing in distressed acquisitions and aggressive restructures. The industry called him disciplined. People who knew him better called him patient. Grant called him dangerous, which is how I knew he was the right person. I hadn't spoken to Julian in almost 7 years when I called. He answered on the second ring. "Claire?" Just that. No surprise, no warmth, no hesitation. He always did know how to make silence feel like information. "I need to meet," I said. A pause. Then, "About your husband?" I stared at my office wall. "Yes." "Today," he said. 4 o'clock, my office. No questions, no pity. Good. I had no use for pity. Julian's office was on the opposite side of downtown in a tower so discreet it looked expensive from the parking garage. His assistant led me into a conference room lined with black-framed city maps and shelves of deal books. There were no family photos, no motivational slogans, no softness anywhere. Julian walked in 3 minutes later, wearing a charcoal suit, and the same expression I remembered from years ago. Controlled, unreadable, just slightly amused by the weakness of other people. He looked older, of course, sharper around the eyes, less forgiving around the mouth. He sat across from me and said, "Show me." I handed him the folder I had assembled that morning. Screenshots, expense trails, draft governance documents, evidence of the planned dilution path, consultant payments to Sienna. He read in complete silence. Once, then twice. When he finished, he placed both hands flat on the table and asked the question that mattered most. "How much of the company do you still control?" 51%, I said. Personally, clean. No trust entanglements, no voting side letters. His eyes lifted to mine. "And he thinks he can get it?" "He thinks he can corner me into signing governance changes, then use a capital raise to dilute me." Julian gave the smallest nod. "And if you don't sign?" "He'll escalate. Legal pressure, character attacks, claims that I'm unstable, burnt out, obstructive." "Will the board support him?" That one hurt. 2 are loyal to whoever wins. 1 owes him favors. 1 owes me honesty, but not courage. Julian leaned back. "So your husband wants your company, your authority, and your replacement installed using your own infrastructure." "Yes." He studied me. "And what do you want?" This is where most women in stories say something noble. Justice, closure, my life back. I said, I want him under someone else's thumb by the end of the quarter. For the first time, Julian smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly either, just with recognition. Finally, someone at the table was speaking the truth. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "I sell my controlling share." "To me," he said. "Yes." He stood and walked toward the window, hands in pockets, city behind him. Then he said, You understand what that means. I do. It means you walk away from the company you built. Yes. It means you don't get emotional control afterward. You don't get to interfere if I restructure, replace, or cut. I know. And it means, he said, turning toward me, that if I do this, I'm not rescuing you. I'm acquiring an asset and destroying a man. I met his eyes. That's why I came to you. Something in the room changed after that. Not romance, not nostalgia, alignment. Julian returned to the table and sat down. What's your price? That is the wrong question, by the way. People think revenge is expensive because it costs money. It isn't. Revenge is expensive because it costs attachment. My price wasn't a number, not really, but I gave him one anyway. We negotiated for 2 hours. He wanted warranties, document access, a clean transfer structure, legal indemnities, and discretion until closing. I wanted speed, absolute confidentiality, and one condition written nowhere official but understood between us like a blood oath. Grant Mercer had to find out only after the deal was irreversible. Julian agreed. Can you keep acting normal? He asked as we stood. Yes. Can you let him think he's winning? I thought about the way Grant had smiled across that boardroom table. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good, because the only thing more dangerous than a greedy man is a greedy man who feels secure. For the next 18 days, I played the part of my life. I went to meetings, reviewed campaign decks, answered staff questions, had dinner with Grant twice with candles on the table and lies between us. I even let him explain the paperwork again. That was the hardest part. Not because it hurt, because it was insulting. He sat in our study one Thursday night with a single-page summary he had prepared to make it easier, and he walked me through the changes like I was a nervous intern. He used a soft voice, a patient voice, a husband voice, said things like, "This protects us," and "You know I'd never do anything against your interests," and "You can trust me." Trust me. That sentence nearly made my skin peel. I nodded in the right places, asked selective questions, pretended to be confused by technical language I could have taught better than the attorneys drafted it. And all the while, Elena and Nathan were mapping everything. Every improper expense, every unauthorized pre-approval, every concealed advisory payment to Sienna. Meanwhile, Julian's team conducted quiet diligence through channels Grant never noticed, because arrogant men only watch the doors they themselves would use. The first real complication came on day 9. I was at the office late reviewing a hospitality rebrand when I saw Sienna in person for the first time. She came out of Grant's office at 7:45 p.m., wearing a cream coat, heels too expensive for consulting, and the kind of confidence that comes from being promised a future already occupied by someone else. She stopped when she saw me, only for a half second. Then she smiled. "Oh," she said, as if I were a surprised guest in my own headquarters. "Still here." That phrase told me everything. Grant had already started redrawing the map in her mind. I rose from my chair. "And you are?" A tiny flicker in her eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. "Sienna Whale, I'm advising on brand transition strategy." "Brand transition," I repeated. "Yes, mostly leadership positioning and market perception." "Of course. Mistresses always call themselves strategic when they're still waiting to be legitimized." I smiled politely. "Well," I said, "I'm sure Mr. Mercer appreciates your positioning expertise." Her mouth tightened. Good. Let her know I knew without saying it. Grant appeared behind her a second later, too quickly, like he heard danger in the air. "There you are," he said to Sienna. Then to me, "I thought you'd left." "Clearly not," I said. The silence stretched. 3 adults, 1 company, 2 lies, and a future only one of us understood. Sienna recovered first. "Lovely to finally meet properly. It won't happen again," I replied. Then I gathered my laptop and left. Grant came home furious that night, not because I had exposed anything, but because I had disrupted the illusion. He entered our bedroom when I was brushing my hair and shut the door harder than necessary. "You embarrassed a consultant I'm trying to work with." I set the brush down. "In my building." "Our building," he snapped. There it was again, the ownership rehearsal. I turned toward him. "Are you sleeping with her?" He froze, then laughed, actually laughed. That cold, dismissive laugh some men use when truth is too close and contempt feels safer than denial. "You're proving exactly why governance needs to change," he said. I stared at him. It was such a monstrous pivot, I almost admired the craftsmanship. Not, "I'm not sleeping with her." Not, "How can you think that?" No. His response to being accused of infidelity and corporate sabotage was to suggest I was emotionally unstable enough to justify removing my authority. That was the moment any last piece of affection died. Not bruised, not wounded, died. "Get out," I said. He narrowed his eyes. "This is my bedroom too." I stepped closer. Not for much longer. He held my gaze for 3 seconds, then turned and left. That night, for the first time in 14 years of marriage, Grant slept in the guest room. And in the dark, I finally allowed myself one small, private truth. I was no longer trying to save anything. 3 days later, the deal terms were final. Julian would acquire my full 51% through a private share sale executed under a lawful transfer pathway embedded in our original shareholder agreement, one Grant himself had insisted on years earlier because he liked clean optionality. That phrase became my favorite joke. Clean optionality. The trapdoor he built for flexibility was about to open beneath him. The transaction would close on a Monday morning. The notice would hit corporate counsel at 8:30, board notification at 8:42, banking control review at 8:50, emergency shareholder meeting called for 10 a.m. Grant's calendar would still say leadership alignment session. I almost wished I could frame that invite. Sunday night, Grant was in an unusually good mood. That should tell you how confident he felt. He poured wine, made pasta, told me he had promising conversations about future expansion. He even touched my shoulder in the kitchen, as if tenderness had not been replaced by strategy months ago. At one point he said, "I know things have been tense, but this next chapter could be really good for us." For us. I looked at him and wondered if he heard himself, or if deceit after enough repetition becomes just another regional accent of ambition. I asked, "Do you ever think about what happens when people find out who you really are?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Then he smiled faintly. "I think successful people get judged. That's part of life." No, that's not what I meant. But I didn't correct him, because by then, correcting Grant Mercer felt like explaining gravity to a man already stepping off a roof. Monday morning arrived, bright and unremarkable. The city looked innocent. I dressed in ivory silk, navy trousers, and the gold watch my father had given me when I signed my first office lease. Armor disguised as elegance. At 8:12 a.m., I parked in the underground garage and sat in the car for exactly 1 minute with both hands on the wheel. Not from fear, from finality. I knew that by noon, the company I had built would no longer be mine. My marriage would be functionally dead, in public, not just in private. And the man I had once loved would be living inside a nightmare of his own design. There should have been grief. There was only stillness. At 8:30, Elena texted one word, "Done." At 8:34, Nathan sent another, "Received." At 8:41, Julian sent nothing at all, which was exactly right. I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor and felt it immediately. The air had changed. Assistants whispering, counsel moving too fast, phones ringing in careful voices. Good. Shock spreads quickest through polished environments. My office door hadn't fully closed behind me when Grant stormed in. He wasn't wearing composure anymore. He was wearing panic. "What did you do?" I looked up from my bag. "Good morning." "What did you do?" he repeated. His face had gone pale under the tan he paid for every winter. He held a printed notice in one hand, creased already from how hard he was gripping it. I folded my coat over the chair. "If you're referring to the share transfer, I exercised my rights under Section 8.4 of the shareholder agreement. Majority shares. Yes. To who?" The silence after that was delicious. Then, from the open door behind him, a voice answered. "To me." Grant turned so fast he nearly lost balance. Julian Cross stood in the doorway with Elena, corporate counsel, and 2 members of his acquisitions team. No dramatics, no raised voice, no smirk. Just presence. That was always Julian's real weapon. He didn't need noise. He rearranged rooms by entering them. Grant stared at him as if a dead man had arrived to collect debt. "No," he said. "No, that's not possible." Julian stepped inside. "It's complete, funds cleared, transfer registered, council notified, board meeting in 19 minutes. Grant looked at me, at Julian, back to me. "You vindictive—" "Careful," Elena said. "Given pending review, I'd advise everyone in this room to speak precisely." Pending review. That part got his attention. "What review?" Grant snapped. Nathan appeared behind the others then, calm, carrying a binder thick enough to ruin a week. "The review into misuse of company funds, undisclosed conflicts of interest, unauthorized consultant retention, and attempted governance manipulation," he said. Grant went very still. You could practically hear his brain sprinting through exits. Deny, blame, delay, attack. He chose attack. "This is insane. Claire's unstable. She's acting emotionally because our marriage—" Julian cut him off. "Your marriage is irrelevant to the board. Your conduct isn't." Grant looked at him with naked hatred. And there it was. The emotion he had hidden from me for months, but could not hide from Julian. Fear. Not fear of losing me, not fear of being exposed as adulterous. Fear of hierarchy reversing. Because men like Grant do not actually fear morality. They fear answering to someone who remembers what they did. At 10 a.m., we convened in the main boardroom. Same table, same skyline, different gravity. The board members were already seated, each wearing a variation of the same expression, professional horror. Grant sat at one end, I sat halfway down, no longer owner, but not yet absent. Julian took the head chair. Grant noticed that. Oh, he noticed. Corporate counsel read the acquisitory summary. Control position, Julian Cross Holdings. Immediate review of executive authority, freeze on discretionary expenditure, pending investigation into irregular payments and fiduciary concerns. Then came the best part. Julian folded his hands and said, "Until the review is complete, Mr. Mercer's signing authority is suspended." Grant shot upright. "You can't do that." Julian didn't even glance at him. "Actually, I can. Majority control, interim risk protocol, council concurrence, and banking compliance. Sit down." The room went silent. Grant did not sit. His face had turned a shade I had never seen before, some mix of rage, disbelief, and public humiliation. He looked around the table for help, at the board members he had charmed, the lawyer he thought he controlled, the executives who once laughed too hard at his jokes. No one moved, because power is adored when rising and abandoned when falling. Finally, he looked at me. "You did this because of her?" He meant Sienna, perhaps, or maybe meant the accusation itself, the shame of being seen. I met his stare. "No," I said. "I did this because you thought I'd let you bury me under paperwork and call it strategy." He opened his mouth again, but Julian spoke first. "Mr. Mercer, you'll remain available for questioning. You'll also submit access credentials, devices used for expense approvals, and all communications related to external consultant engagements." That was the moment Grant understood this was not a scene, It was a system, and systems do not care how loudly men protest inside them. He sat down slowly. I wish I could say that was the end. It wasn't. Humiliation has chapters. At 1:35 p.m., Sienna arrived. No one had warned her. That detail still pleases me. She walked through the executive floor in a white blazer, carrying a tablet and a leather portfolio, smiling at reception like a woman entering the life she was promised. Then she saw security by Grant's office. Then she saw HR. Then she saw me. I was standing beside the glass conference room reviewing transition notes with Elena. Our eyes met across the floor. Her smile fell first. Grant came out of a side room seconds later, looking wrecked. No tie, top button open, 2 lawyers with him. Sienna moved toward him immediately. "Grant, what's going on?" Wrong question, wrong place, wrong future. He glanced at her, not with affection, not even with alliance, with resentment. Because when weak men are cornered, they begin hating their accomplices for being witnesses. "This isn't the time," he muttered. She looked stunned. "I've been calling you." "Then stop," he snapped. That landed hard. Even from across the room, I could see the blood drain from her face. She had expected difficulty. She had not expected disposability. Julian stepped out just then, saw her, and asked corporate counsel, "Is this the consultant paid through executive discretionary funds?" Counsel checked a file. "Yes." Julian looked at Sienna directly. "Your contract is terminated effective immediately. Finance will contact you regarding repayment review of improperly approved invoices." She stared at him, then at Grant, then at me. And in that sequence, she understood her position in the story at last. Not successor, not strategic partner, not queen in waiting. Expense line item. By evening, gossip had outrun official communication. By Tuesday morning, the industry knew there had been a control event at Vail and Mercer. By Tuesday afternoon, selective details had leaked. Internal review, misconduct concerns, executive suspension. Grant spent 48 hours calling in favors that no longer existed. It turned out that the same men who cheer bold leadership at charity galas become surprisingly unavailable when forensic accounting enters the room. He called board members. They deferred to counsel. He called bankers. They cited compliance. He called 2 reporters he had cultivated for years. Neither printed his side. Because no one likes attaching themselves to a man falling under documented suspicion unless he is still useful. And Grant Mercer was no longer useful. He was a cautionary tale in an expensive suit. As for me, I packed my office in stages, not because I had to immediately, because I wanted to do it while people could see. There's dignity in orderly departure. I took my sketchbooks, client awards, my father's watch stand, the framed photo of our original 4-person team from the warehouse years, and the brass letter opener engraved with the company's old logo. I left the giant launch plaque with Grant's name on it. He had loved that plaque. Let him keep the relic of the myth. On Wednesday afternoon, Julian knocked once on my open office door. "Walk with me," he said. We went to the terrace on the 29th floor where the city wind kept conversations private. For a moment, we just stood there. Then he said, "He'll be gone by Friday." I nodded. "And Sienna?" "Already retained counsel," he replied, "mostly to protect herself." "Will she?" He gave one shoulder movement that might have been a shrug. "Depends how much she signed and how much she knew." We stood in silence again. Finally, he looked at me. "Do you regret it? Selling the company, ending the marriage this way, handing power to the one Grant feared?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret that I built something beautiful with someone who only loved it when he thought he could take it from me." Julian said nothing, so I continued. "But no, I don't regret stopping him." He nodded once. Then, after a pause, "You know he'll call this betrayal." I laughed quietly. Of course he will, because that is the final luxury of selfish people. to commit betrayal and still claim ownership over the word. Friday came with rain. Grant was formally removed as acting executive. A negotiated resignation was offered in place of termination for cause, contingent on cooperation, repayment terms, and non-disparagement. He fought it for 3 hours, then signed. Not because he accepted defeat, because the alternatives were worse. When he came to collect personal items, I happened to be in the lobby finishing paperwork with facilities. That wasn't luck. That was scheduling. He saw me near the revolving doors and stopped. He looked smaller somehow. Same height, same coat, but reduced, like the architecture around him no longer believed in him. For a second, I thought he might try charm again, or anger, or apologies shaped like self-pity. Instead, he walked over and said in a low voice, "You destroyed everything." I held his gaze. "No," I replied. "I refuse to let you steal it." He gave a bitter smile. "You think Cross will respect you? He used you." "Probably," I said, "but he didn't lie to me about it." That hit. You could see it, because truth, when perfectly aimed, does not need volume. He looked away first. Then he said, "You'll end up alone." I considered that. Maybe he meant unloved. Maybe he meant professionally displaced. Maybe he meant punished by the universe for not staying compliant. I said, "Alone is peaceful when you've been sharing a house with an enemy." He flinched. Good. Then he left. No dramatic music, no collapse, no cinematic rain-soaked kneeling. Just a man walking out of a building he thought he owned. To me, that was better, because reality humiliates more cleanly than theater. A month later, the divorce filing became public record. Grant's attorneys pushed for discretion. Mine pushed for accuracy. We settled faster than he expected because much of the leverage he thought marriage gave him had been destroyed the moment he lost corporate control. The house was sold, the investment account split, his reputation less evenly. As for the company, Julian did what Julian always does. He stabilized it, cut dead weight, promoted competence, brought in disciplined operators, and left the creative core intact. He even restored the original founding statement to the lobby wall, the one Grant had replaced 2 years ago with some sterile nonsense about market leadership. The original line had been mine: "Build something so honest it doesn't need a performance." Maybe that was sentimental. I don't care. Sentiment built the company. Performance almost killed it. People always ask when they hear stories like this whether revenge heals you. No. That's the wrong word. Revenge doesn't heal. Healing is soft, private, slow. What revenge does, when earned, when measured, and executed without hysteria, is restore proportion. It returns consequence to people who believed they were exempt from it. It places weight back where it belongs. Grant wanted me erased quietly. He wanted signatures instead of blood, governance instead of force, consultants instead of confession. He wanted to replace me in my own life and call it the next chapter. But he forgot one thing. Women who build from nothing understand leverage better than the men who arrive once the floors are polished. He thought ownership was a line on paper. He was wrong. Ownership is seeing the structure clearly enough to know which beam to pull, and I knew exactly which one would bring his world down. The funniest part, for years, Grant used to say that business was never personal. He loved saying that. At dinners, in negotiations, whenever someone got hurt by one of his decisions. Business is never personal. As if consequences become cleaner when spoken in a boardroom. But betrayal is always personal, especially when it climbs into bed beside you, especially when it wears your last name, especially when it tries to sign your removal in blue ink and calls it simplification. So no, I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't warn him twice. I sold my controlling stake to the one man he betrayed before me, and in the end, Grant Mercer got exactly what he had earned. Not just loss, not just exposure, not just divorce. Submission. He wanted to rule my company with his mistress at his side. Instead, he spent his final week there asking permission to enter conference rooms owned by his enemy. That was enough for me, not because I'm cruel, because proportion matters, and because sometimes the cleanest way to survive betrayal is not to hold on harder, it's to let go strategically, then stand back and watch the thief discover he just broke into a house that was already sold.